in when you've heard the other two gentlemen presenting. So another big hand clap to Ofa and Kylah. Thank you, ladies. Our next presentation is entitled, is the presentation ready? The Maurice Wilkins Centre and Science of Sugar Program, to be presented by Professor Peter Shepherd. I'll just quickly read. Peter Shepherd is a Deputy Director of the Maurice Wilkins Centre. He was born in Kaitaia, New Zealand. He did his PhD at Massey University, Palmerston North. Following postdoctoral positions at Harvard and Cambridge University, he became a staff member at the University College of London, where he was promoted to professor in 2003. Since returning to New Zealand in 2004, Peter has continued to focus on research of the signal transduction pathways in the cell and how defects in these lead to the development of cancer and diabetes. So let's welcome Peter. Thank you, Peter.
Is that good enough? Good. Thank you very much for the opportunity and invitation to speak here. My first visit to Suva. Hopefully won't be the last. I wanted to introduce to you first our research group in New Zealand and what we do and how it might relate to you here. So the Maurice Wilkins Centre in New Zealand is one of our national centres of research excellence. We're essentially a virtual network of people throughout New Zealand from all the major universities in New Zealand. We're named after Maurice Wilkins. Maurice Wilkins won the Nobel Prize along with Watson and Crick for the discovery of the structure of DNA. So it's very highly appropriate that our research institute should be working on genetic research. Maurice Wilkins was born in New Zealand. He's one of only 3 Nobel Prize winners to be born in New Zealand. So we're honoured that his family allowed the research centre to be named after him. So we're a national centre of research excellence. Our focus is on strategies to defeat cancer, infectious diseases, and metabolic diseases. And of course, these are all relevant issues for you here in Fiji as well. And our particular focus of the group that I'm involved in is on the metabolic disease side of things. As a whole, we bring together 350 scientists and clinicians from across New Zealand under this structure of a virtual institute. So instead of us working individually as in the past, we can now work together as a team to solve these problems, because these are major issues and they're not easy to solve. You will all know this data here. You'll know that many diseases are going down in the world, heart disease and stroke, because of the new strategies for treating them and preventing them have been successful. Cancer really isn't going up very much in the world, it's staying about the same. But the disease that's gone up the most is metabolic diseases, particularly type 2 diabetes, and you'll be seeing this here in Fiji as well. In the last 20 years, the incidence around the world has doubled, trebled, quadrupled, whatever, in different countries. It's a huge problem. And the question we've been asking ourselves across the world in this area is this, oh, sorry, the question we've been asking ourselves around the world is this environment causing this impact of metabolic diseases, or is it genes that we have, or is it both? Of course, in reality, it's probably a combination of both, but in the past, the research has probably focused heavily on environment and strategies to control it using people's behavior. However, recent advances in technology mean that it's now very easy to look at genes and, or much easier anyway, to look at genes and to look at how genes influence things that happen to us. Now, in the field of metabolic disease, we have known for a long time that there is a strong genetic link in terms of our risk of developing these diseases. And I think I won't go into the details, but it's probably best illustrated by pictures like this from twins. If you look at twins, even ones that have been separated at birth, if you look at identical twins, later in life, they have the same body shape. Non-identical twins will be very different. These ones share exactly the same genes, these ones don't. And in fact, in identical twins for traits like obesity and type 2 diabetes, you know, the figures of shared risk range from 60 to 80%. So if you have exactly the same genes, your risk of diabetes is, you know, 60 to 80%. So that's incredible, because that sort of says that, you know, that the genes are a major factor. And if we're really going to understand this, we need to understand the genes. The challenge in doing that, of course, is that our genes are all different. Wherever we come from in the world, wherever we have inherited those genes from over time are different. So we can't just take the results of genetic studies done in America or Europe and extrapolate them to the rest of the world. These have to be done out in communities across the world. And of course, that's not so easy in small countries because of the cost structures and because of the difficulties, you know, of the access to the scientific facilities. Even in New Zealand, this is a huge challenge for us because of the costs involved and because of the need to have multiple different skill sets of people working on this project. So this is one advantage of having a organization like the Maurice Wilkins Centre. We can bring together experts from across New Zealand to work on this problem. And what we're doing in our work at the moment, we're focusing on genetics of Maori and Pacific people. And that's work being done by Tony Merriman, who will speak after me and give you more details on how he does that work and what he does. But that by itself is not really going to help us very much. What we need to do is link that to understanding of the biology. So we link this to all our scientists in our network. So as we find gene variants that potentially impact on metabolic disease, we do the science behind it to understand how that gene variant works and what it's doing. We then undertake detailed phenotyping studies of people to understand in detail what's happening to their metabolism and how that links to the different gene variants we find, so that we can really pin down exactly how these genetic variants are working. And finally, we want to apply that in clinic and to understand how this can be used either to inform prevention strategies or to inform medical strategies that can better treat patients, because we are all different and not all patients will respond to a treatment the same way. Not all people will respond to an intervention the same way. And there are many examples building up around the world now of genetic factors that influence either response to intervention or response to medication around the world. Now, as I mentioned before, those studies have been done on other populations in the world. They haven't been done on people in this part of the world. So what we're planning to do is apply that and do that work here in this part of the world. And to do that, we have a team approach where we get together all of the scientists in New Zealand who work in this space, and it's like a relay race. We pass off to each other the information so that we can get past the finish line at the end of the race. But we also realize that we need more help than that. It's not just us. We have international networks of collaborators across the world who we need to work with to further our knowledge in this space. We have to work globally and share our knowledge to solve this problem. But not only that, we have to work with the communities. And so previously as scientists, we would just do our research in a lab. We might publish a scientific paper, and then we would move on to something else. But to get the uptake in the community, we've now realized that we need to work with those communities, and particularly Maori and Pacific communities in New Zealand, and offers a good example of how we work with Pacific communities in New Zealand in our genetic research. But one step further is also to work into schools, because There's some messages that we can take to schools from this that will be very powerful and hopefully live with people for the rest of their life and help stop this metabolic disease crisis. Importantly, though, in this, I just want to mention here that part of our strategy is to have research centres focusing on this. One is at the University of Auckland, one in Wellington, one Tony's work in Otago. But these red areas here, anybody who knows the geography of New Zealand will say, why on earth are you doing research in this place? There's no one lives there. Or up here, that's also very isolated. But they are areas where a large number of Maori people live, and they don't traditionally have research there, but we have formed partnership collaborations with the local health organisations in those areas to bring them on board onto the team of the research so that they're involved in the research. And Donald joined us for our first major event in that regard a couple of weeks ago in Waipiro Bay. And this is starting to really pay dividends because they can inform us a lot of the stuff about what's happening at the ground level. They are the people who are the participants in the study. But more importantly, what we've done is we've formed joint research centres with them, which we hope will have a life of their own and become a long-term success for those people. The aims of these research centres are to do the research I just described, but also to develop workforce and bring about empowerment of those people so that they can become mainstream in the research going forward. These centres are jointly run because they need our scientific input, at least at this stage, but the ownership of them is with those groups. In other words, they have the veto, they have the casting vote, they own all of the genetic information from those studies. It's not our information, it's theirs that they choose to share with us in a partnership model. And I think that's really important for this type of research in that way. Now, I just want to put up a provocative slide here and say maybe one of our reasons for visiting here is to see whether there's opportunity for that kind of model also in the Pacific, particularly maybe in Fiji. And this is something we're exploring on our visit here, and we'd like to hear more from you guys about later on. I just want to move on now and describe one of our studies. This is my day-to-day research is more cell biology and molecular biology, but we realized that we needed programs that could reach out and particularly into schools. We realized that this was a great opportunity to get children interested in science and to get them understanding their metabolism and what was going on in their body, but at the same time for us to do some research as well. Now, of course, Fiji is a very famous country for producing sugar, so everyone here, I'm sure, knows everything about sugar already, right? And but sugar, of course, is the table sugar we have is sucrose, which is really just one glucose molecule and one fructose molecule linked together. And in recent years, actually, the amount of total sugar in the world that we take in hasn't really gone up that much. Refined sugar has gone down, though, because high fructose corn syrup has gone up. So they sort of balance each other out a bit. But the question is, scientifically, what's a really interesting question is that these both glucose and fructose have exactly the same chemical formula, C6H12O6, yet they differ only in this position of this double bond here. So they're almost identical. Why does the body treat them so differently? Why are they treated by our body so differently? Glucose here is a sugar that we all metabolize. Glucose is the blood sugar we have in our blood. Glucose is the sugar that keeps us alive by giving our brain cells the energy it needs to survive. We're able to take up, all of us in this room are very good at taking up glucose from our gut and storing it in our liver. It is essential for life. But we, across this room here, will all vary a lot in the way that we handle the fructose part of this. Okay? So we're all good at this. We will all vary in the way that we deal with the fructose. Now, normally, as food comes into your stomach and then into your small intestine, it will be absorbed via the portal vein to your liver for further metabolism. And for a lot of us, that fructose will be absorbed in this way. But for some people, they can't absorb the fructose as well as others, for reasons we don't understand yet. And it will go all the way to their large intestine. And when it's in their large intestine, it will ferment because of all the bacteria that are in your large intestine, and it will produce gas. So those people who haven't absorbed the fructose into their blood will produce gas. And that gas goes into your blood and comes out on your breath. And you can actually detect it with just a small handheld meter. And that's what we're doing in schools. So our program in schools, what we do is we get the kids to do the experiment. They take a dose of fructose, they swallow the fructose, and then they do breath tests to measure whether or not they've got hydrogen gas coming out on their breath. And that tells them whether they're an absorber or not an absorber, right? And our aim from a scientific point of view is to find out how many kids are absorbers and how many are not, and does that correlate with BMI and all those sort of research questions. But for the kids, it's the first time they've actually been able to do a human experiment, an experiment on themselves and their friends. And they plot the data, they do the statistics, they do the averages and so on. And it gets them asking, what's going on here? Why am I an absorber? Why am I not an absorber? Why are you an absorber? What's that sugar doing in my body? What's the consequences of metabolic disease? What, you know, but it's them asking. It's not me telling them. It's not me saying, you need to stop sugar, or you need to do this, or you need to do that. It's the kids finding out for themselves. And what we hope that it will achieve is, at least for some kids, a different way of learning about themselves and about metabolic disease. And we also hope it will have a really big impact on their interest in science and, you know, in health issues and the relevance of those for them. And so we think it's a new way. We think it's applicable in any part of the world, and it could be something that people in Fiji might be interested in trialing in schools here as well. So we give them about as much as in 1 can of Coke at this stage. This is our current, but we can change this in later years and do different amounts of fructose. We can look at a whole range of different regimes going forward. But the important thing is that the students do this themselves, and that the teachers weave classroom information around this to make this a really learning experience for the kids, and that gets their interest going in this. And we've done this in a whole range of schools around New Zealand, so we've shown it can work in little schools, big schools, town schools, country schools, and it's a good way for me to get a free trip to these beautiful places around New Zealand and see the countryside. But actually it's very, very effective. And the data is reproducible, and we are starting to see some differences between groups. I won't show you all the data here today, but we are actually collecting large-scale population-level data on fructose tolerance in the population while we do this. And what we can start doing is seeing whether that changes. Can a behavioural change in a child over time affect their fructose uptake? If they go off sugar for a long time, will that change their fructose uptake? We can do all those experiments now in schools and get data on that sort of stuff. Okay, so then that's an example of how we're trying to apply, you know, our knowledge of the science of the metabolism out into the community, out into schools, out into education, and trying to span that gap, because we realize if we don't start doing that as scientists, we're going to, you know, it's going to be harder and harder to win these battles. Okay, so I think that was my last slide, and I'm going to hand over to Tony now, who's going to tell you more about the detailed genetic side of things.
Thank you, Peter.